Hello dear learners. And welcome to this series of e-learning lectures, prepared to help you develop the skills and competencies related to the field of didactics. This is lecture number 6. Methods of teaching. By the end of this lecture, learners will be able to describe and explain the notion of teaching methods, differentiate the popular methods of teaching, understand the need for methods in the field of education. But, before we move forwards, if you have not been here before, then, welcome to UNIV-ENGLISH channel. If you do like videos like this, then make sure to hit the subscribe button. And also smash the notification bell to receive notifications of when I produce more videos like this. Also, let me know down the comments. What are the difficulties you are facing right now? So, I can use your ideas for future videos. Introduction. The word method is derived from the Greek words meta, through, and hodos, route, way, direction, meaning that it specifies the way one must take toward a destination. It follows that a method cannot pre-exist an approach since it is a subordinate to it and it serves its purpose of implementing the chosen approach rationally. Methodology is a term used by educators to describe pedagogical practices regardless of the type of method teachers use. This distinction is important in that it can assist teachers in gaining insights into both the theoretical frameworks behind particular teaching methods, as well as how they are applied in their actual classrooms. Taking a look at the history of language teaching from Roman times until today, one often wonders why there have been so many different methods. Noonan, 1991 page 3, explains that is so because all methods have one thing in common. They all assume that there is a single set of principles, which will determine whether or not learning will take place. Thus, they all propose a single set of precepts for teacher and learner classroom behavior, and asset that if these principles are faithfully followed, they will result in learning for all. Why study language teaching methods? A teaching method is a set of classroom guidelines designed to meet specific linguistic objectives. These standards tend to consider specifically the roles and behaviors of teachers and students and include the features and sequence of lesson objectives and materials. Many scholars consider these methods to be universally applicable to a variety of audiences in different ways. What is a method? The question now is, what is a method? How are methods described throughout the centuries? Edward Anthony, 1963, was the first linguist to describe the term with specific reference to language teaching. He has developed a hierarchical model consisting of approach, method, and technique. Here the arrangements are hierarchical, and the organizational key is that the techniques follow a method consistent with a method. Thus, a method implies a plan for presenting appropriate material in accordance with the approach, which guides classroom activities. While an approach is axiomatic, a method is procedural, so several methods can be considered to be part of the same approach. The Anthony framework attempted to portray the entire language teaching operations as simple, hierarchical relationship between approach, method, and technique, without in any way considering the complex connections between intervening factors such as societal demands, institutional resources and constraints or restrictions, instructional effectiveness, and learners' needs. Method is an overall plan for the orderly presentation of language material, no part of which contradicts, and all of which is based upon, the selected approach. A method is an umbrella term for the specification and interrelation of theory and practice. Richards and Rogers. A method is theoretically related to an approach, is organizationally determined by a design, and is practically realized in procedure. Richards and Rogers, 2001 page 20. Popular language teaching methods. Many different methods were developed to align with the new social requirements. This refers mostly to dissatisfaction with the results of the methods that had previously been used and mostly to the fact that there have been increasing efforts to make education more democratic to encourage more people to benefit from it. At the same time, technological evolutions brought the globe closer and made it essential for individuals to become proficient in languages other than their own if they wanted to be able to communicate with people worldwide for educational, cultural or economic reasons. Accordingly, different teaching methods appeared to the fore. The most common are listed as follow. 1. The grammar translation method, 1840s, 1940s. The grammar translation method was the most popular and widely used method for language teaching between the ages of 1840s to 1940s. It was originally used to teach classical languages, such as Latin and Greek, which were not taught for everyday communication. Latin was considered as a classic language. The learners were made able to study the literature of Latin language through learning the grammatical rules of language and learning the vocabulary, so that learners may translate the language in their first language and in the second language. But gradually, it was generalized to teach modern languages such as French and English. In the Western world, prior to the 20th century, foreign language learning in schools was synonymous with the learning of Latin or Greek. Little thought was given at the time to teaching oral use of languages. Languages were not being taught to learn oral communication but to learn for the sake of being scholarly or, in some instances, for gaining a reading proficiency in a foreign language. The classical method, now known as the grammar translation method, focuses on grammatical rules, memorization of vocabulary and of various declensions and conjugations, translation of texts, and doing written exercises. This method is a way of studying a language through a detailed analysis of its grammar rules, followed by an application of this knowledge to the task of translating sentences into and out of the target language. The method was based on a prescription of the whole grammar of the language according to the criterion of what is right and what is wrong, in order to enable the learners to master the general rules governing the written form of the language and to translate from and into the foreign language. 2. The direct method, 1900s. The direct method was the outcome of the reaction against the grammar translation method. It was based on the assumption that the learners of a foreign and second language should directly think in English. This method is against the translation of written and oral text and focuses on telling the meanings of the words through action, demonstration or real objects. This method focuses on directly thinking, doing discussion and conversation in the second language. Richards and Rogers, 2001. In this method the teaching is done entirely in the target language. The learner is not allowed to use his or her mother tongue. Grammar rules are avoided and there is an emphasis on good pronunciation. Perwarno, 2006, described the aims of the direct method. He described that the direct method is an attempt and effort to form a link between thought and expression and between experience and language. This method was developed in order to overcome the shortcomings of the grammar translation method, which was unhelpful to those who wanted to learn a foreign language for communication. This method became popular during the early years of the 20th century. It is called direct because the teaching of the foreign language was done without any resort to the mother tongue. It is based on the assumption that one should learn a foreign language as one would learn one's mother tongue. 3. The oral approach, the audio-lingual method, 1930s, 1960s. The oral approach was developed from 1930s to the 1960s by British applied linguistics such as Harold Palmer and A.S. Hornsby. The main difference between the oral approach and the direct method was that the methods which were developed under this approach had theoretical principles about the selection, grading, and presentation of the content and material. This sequencing of the content would lead to better learning with a good knowledge of vocabulary and grammatical patterns. In this approach, all the points of language were to be presented in situations which led to the second name of the approach, i.e. situational language teaching. Although, the teachers are not aware of this approach today, but it had long-lasting impact on language learning. However, its focus on oral practice, grammar and sentence patterns is still supported by the teachers, IBID. After the Second World War, there emerged a wide world interest in foreign languages and an urgent need for international communication. As there was a general feeling of discontent with the traditional methods, namely the grammar translation method and the direct method, whose validity and adequacy, especially for teaching the spoken form of language, were questioned, the necessity of developing a new teaching method which would cater for these shortcomings was felt. The oral approach is a method in which children to use whatever hearing they get from their surroundings. They also take help from the context to understand and use language. The target is to develop the skills in the individual so that he can communicate and function independently. This approach helps in the development of reading and writing skills. Richards and Rogers, 2001. Developments in the fields of linguistics as well as experimentation in educational technology and psychology gave rise to the Aural approach, which was a reaction to the grammar translation method and a modification of the direct method. The theory on which the approach is based implies the acquisition of oral language skills through oral practice based on repetition and learning by analogy. The Aural approach is based on the belief that language is essentially acquired through habits and that responses must be drilled until they become natural and automatic. This reflects a behaviorist view of language learning influenced by the psychologist Skinner. 4. Total physical response, 1970s. Total physical response is a language teaching method built around the coordination of speech and action. It focuses on language through physical motor activity. Total physical response, TPR, is an approach to teaching a second language, based on listening linked to physical activities which are designed to reinforce comprehension. TPR is a method developed by Dr. James J. Asher, a professor of psychology at San Jose State University, to aid learning second languages. TPR is a language teaching method in which learners listen to instructions in the target language, and carry out a sequence of physical actions. This is based on the belief that a second language is learned most effectively in the early stages if the pressure for production is taken off the learners. TPR is mainly based on using physical movement to react to verbal input in order to reduce student inhibitions and lower their affective filter, stress. Krashen regards the provision of comprehensible input and reduction of stress as keys to successful language acquisition, and he sees performing physical actions in the target language as a means of making input comprehensible and minimizing stress. Asher claimed that the fastest and least stressful way to achieve an understanding of any target language is to follow directions uttered by the instructor, without native language translation. 5. Suggestopedia, 1970s–1980s. Suggestopedia is the study of these suggestive factors in a learning situation. It is a portmanteau of the words suggestion and pedagogy. Suggestopedia seeks to help learners remove psychological barriers to learning. It aims at creating a relaxed learning climate with low lighting and soft music in the background. Suggestopedia is an educational method based on a modern understanding of how the human brain works and how we learn most effectively. It is often claimed that it can teach languages approximately 3 times as quickly as conventional methods. Lozanov suggests that the human brain could process great quantities of material if simply given the right conditions for learning, among which are a state of relaxation and giving over the control of the teacher. Learning is a matter of attitude, not aptitude. Lozanov has demonstrated that through a careful learning environment, including most importantly a specially trained teacher, the learning process can be accelerated. Students are asked to choose a name and character in the target language and culture, and imagine that person. Choosing a new identity will enhance students' feelings of security and allows them to be more open. Students just relax and listen to them being read and later playfully practice the language during an activation phase. Lozanov, 1982, indicates that this method transcends the language classroom and can be applied in other school subjects. He claims that about 200 to 240 new words may be introduced to each lesson. 6. The Communicative Method, 1970s, 2010s. Communicative language teaching was developed in the era of revolutions in British language teaching traditions from the late 1960s. Before communicative language teaching, situational language teaching was in practice in Britain for language teaching. Communicative language teaching was actually developed in the opposition of the audio-lingual method, which focuses on drilling and memorization. Communicative language teaching focuses on developing the ability of communication in learners in real-life situations. It focuses on meaning rather than accuracy. Richards and Rogers, 2001. It is generally referred to as the functional notional approach. It emerged in the early 1970s as a result of the work of the Council of Europe experts. The approach was primarily designed to meet the needs of adult learners, tourists or people engaged in academic, cultural, technical or economic activities. However, it can be traced back to the work of Chomsky in the 1960s when he advanced the two notions of competence and performance as a reaction to the prevalent audio-lingual method and its view on language learning. These two concepts were later developed by Hymes into a communicative competence which refers to the psychological, cultural and social rules which discipline the use of speech. The new concept of communicative competence has been expanded by many writers. They have proposed 7 categories of communicative functions that are requesting and giving information, expressing thought processes, expressing opinions, moral discipline and evaluation, modifying people's behavior, expressing personal feelings and interacting socially. Under each of these categories, there are many notions. Other categories have also been identified to facilitate interaction between speakers from the first lesson of learning the foreign language. The focus of this method is to enable the learner to communicate effectively and appropriately in the various situations she would be likely to find herself in. The content of CELT courses are functions such as inviting, suggesting, complaining or notions such as the expression of time, quantity, location. Conclusion. Language teaching over the centuries has provided a variety of helpful tools and methods for teachers working in language classrooms nowadays. It is the teacher's responsibility to take this knowledge and put it to productive use in the classroom for the benefit of all learners alike. This knowledge must be put to effective use in the classroom by all educators to meet the learner's needs. Teachers must recognize that all students have the potential to learn and that it is their responsibility to organize the teaching-learning process in such a way that helps learners acquire new competencies. In the next videos, lights will be shed on each teaching methods. We will focus on typical lessons and the techniques used throughout the different stages as devised by teachers. Also, we will consider the advantages and shortcomings of the proposed teaching methods.